and Olympic champions. He has been a member of the strength conditioning staff for the Baltimore Orioles, as well as a consultant for multiple other professional organizations. Over his 13 years of experience in speed development, he has acquired usable knowledge specific to athletics performance enhancement. He has also been published in peer-reviewed journals, magazines, and online journals over the last decade, and has presented on speed development at the state, regional, national, and international level. Let's welcome Todd Brown.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. First off, thanks everybody for coming out a little bit and listening to me ramble on about some speed development, specifically for field athletes in regard to linear speed. When Dr. Stiggins asked me to present, the first thing I thought of, and you have to follow me on this, and is I thought about Cajun food, because I'm originally from Louisiana, and this is kind of, I guess, goes along with everybody from your respective area. You know, every time I leave and I see Cajun on the menu somewhere, I'm like, oh man, should I get it? Is it going to be any good? I get it, and then I go, it just wasn't that good. Just wasn't that good. And I kind of have the same mentality with speed development. A lot of times I see talks all over the country, and I go, you know what, I should know that. Kind of look at it, and I watch it and then go, you know, it was good, but it's just sometimes they miss things, especially because speed development, at least the majority of talks that I've seen, are very track-oriented. There's a lot of video clips that are thrown out that are A skip, B skips, you know, running around the field, running around the track, and that's well and good. But today I wanted to kind of create a presentation, again, specific to field sports, but also the exercises are going to be geared towards the resistance training side of things. And the reason I'm doing that, too, is just not too long ago, I was with an organization, or I was brought in to work with an athlete that happened to have a problem. He was a pretty talented guy. Happened to have a problem where his feet would kick out a little bit and foot plant. We'll see this a little later. And the coach told me, he said, you know, the guy's just not coachable. I tell him to straighten his feet out all the time, and he just won't do it. And I said, you know what, you probably should just skip that and tell him to run faster, because, you know, he just can't do it. And part of the reason he can't do it is because he's got a deficiency. Politically correct, limitation. He's got a physical limitation. He just physically cannot get into a good position. And that goes back to strength. And we're going to hit on that as we go through this. The exercises that I'm going to show you today as we get through it are not magic bullets. Like the gentleman I was at the round table yesterday, the gentleman, I think from Baylor, that talked about how he's not big into giving, this is my template of workout, here you go. I'm a big believer in that. I'm going to show you some exercises today that are sometimes left out of programs or really not concentrated on that will actually benefit field sport athletes specifically as we go through here. First off, take a second. Homer's always a good guy to use. Speed development. Which one of the 5 sports is the most different from the other 4? Take a second, look at it, think about it, and tell me what you think. We've got baseball, cricket, soccer, well, football for your Europeans, golf, and ice hockey. Which one is most different? Anybody care to answer? Not all at once, because I want to make sure I can hear. Soccer. Why? Okay, good. Anybody else? Nobody? Very good. Basically what's going on here, this is a psychological, like little eval. We're not going to get into that side of it. It'll tell you whether you're objective, subjective, emotional thinker. That's beside the point here. What we're looking at is, I mean, everything is correct, really. I mean, ice hockey, surface. Golf, individual. Golf, lowest score. Soccer, and nothing in your hands. Baseball, defense. Defense has the ball. So if everything is correct, then everything is incorrect, if that makes sense. And what does this have to do with speed development? Well, unfortunately, in a formal curriculum, you have from a strength and conditioning standpoint, you have classes that you can take from a physiology standpoint, things of that nature. But speed development, it's not like that. I mean, how many people here, show of hands, majored in either exercise, phys, kines, or like physical education? Show of hands, how many people here majored in speed development? Exactly. But you're expected to be able to institute speed development drills and progressions to help athletes. And that's how the waters get kind of muddied, if you will. As Homer and Lisa are showing, pi and pi. I mean, there's nothing formal out there that really tells you or dictates how to do what. So we have some anecdote mixed with science, some prevailing dogma that may not be necessarily the case. As we move through this, we're going to touch on some of those. Real quick, the journey, we're going to have make sure we have usable information. We need to make sure everybody's on the same page. We're going to really look here, and I'm going to beat this to death a little bit early on with the sprinters versus field sports. Obviously, we need Aristotle's help with elephants. You can't talk about sprinting without some fruit. We're going to get into the what-ifs, which may seem kind of a higher-level thinking standpoint. Touch on max speed. Then we're going to cut the fat, because we're kind of all in the same boat. And I say we usually have a lot of athletes to deal with, very limited time, and you need to maximize performance. So we need to streamline training and have an understanding of why, what, how, what we should avoid, and what we can actually institute. And then we get to, finally, we'll get into the exercises. As we move forward, usable, this is actually, this is a quote, and I made sure I wrote this down and asked the speaker later because I wanted to make sure I got this right. This is a quote, and this is an actual slide used in a speed development talk years ago. And I'll read this out loud. One is mechanical, as the axial angular momentum resulting from forward and backward leg movement is offset via contralateral arm action torso rotation, while the other is neuromuscular and relates to the central innervation patterns. That was used as in, this is kind of a teachable thing we need to institute with our athletes. And I've never spoken to an athlete like that in my life. And to be honest, I've been pretty fortunate to be around some pretty talented people and some colleagues that really get it, know what they're talking about. And I don't know if we've ever spoken to each other like this. We want to make sure that it's usable. We want to make sure that it's digestible and has a purpose. And it doesn't matter how smart you are. If you can't relate the material to an athlete, it's really worthless. It really is. Because ultimately, they're the ones that need to benefit. And that's a slide in regard to sprinting that was used. And I don't really know what that means. But either way, we're going to oversimplify things as much as we can, and again, make sure it's usable. Easiest equation for faster sprinting. Very easiest way to go about it. More force. We want to minimize ground time in a productive direction. There's a lot of research starting about 2007, 2006, some date back a little bit earlier than that, all the way through literally last thing I saw, which I'll touch on today, is in December, about force generation is very, very important. Minimizing ground contact and the orientation to the ground. We're going to hit an exercise later on that has something to do with this specifically and showing you the reason why it's important. And I mean, again, it's an oversimplification of a very complex problem, but we want to make sure it's usable and digestible. And I always love pictures like this. And I've been asking around the 30% protein rule because I don't understand that at all. But this guy's obviously fish and vegetables and 30% protein rule, and you look like that. That's how I'm assuming. And that's going to be important to remember. Either way, getting on the same page. If I say field sport athletes, speed development, give me a dynamic that you train. Anybody, I don't care. Anybody. I'll give you one. Deceleration. What's another one? Acceleration. What's another one? Anything else? Change of direction. Any more? Please. Okay, that's fine. Good. And that's pretty much universal. I hear that all the time. We're going to touch on how easy it is to succumb to a prevailing dogma of the lack of maximum speed needed in field sports. And I throw myself under the bus a lot. I think that debate, not necessarily argument, but debate has been pushed aside a lot in our community. I think debate is very important by virtue of moving a field forward. And max speed is a debate that we're going to hit today a little bit. But we want to make sure that we're all on the same page. Common sense, everybody's different. Speed development is an artful implementation of scientific evidence. It is imperative that you have some kind of evidence to support what you are doing and why you are doing it. It is imperative. The art comes into play because everybody's different. Common sense stuff. Common sense stuff. If I'm training this guy, I'm probably going to have some differences than working with her, and probably different than her. And to be honest, an enormous amount of difference from this guy. And again, he's 40 years old in that picture. 30% protein rule. We have to understand that track is not a field sport, and field sport is not a sprinter. And we talk about this all the time, and everybody says, yeah, no kidding. But we continually, as a community, and I'm going to use a good example here, a couple of examples, fall into that trap. Fall into that trap. Somebody at the table that I was sitting at yesterday brought up a point of the importance, and this is some advice, it's funny, this is some advice I got from a guy considered a pioneer now in the field, that you need to look outside of your field, your specific field, to gain knowledge, to bring back to your field, to move it forward sometimes. Everybody here, how many people know what formal logic syllogisms are? Of course you do. Everybody knows this. You've taken a class in college. Aristotelian enthymemes. What the hell does this have to do with speed development? This is what we're doing. Basically, this is a way to take an incredibly complex idea and boil it down to simplistic terms to have a better understanding of what's going on. People having trouble seeing the forest because of the trees. This is what we're doing a lot of times. Sprinters sprint. This may be coming back to you if you've taken a logic class. Field sport athletes sprint. So therefore, field sport athletes are sprinters. And you go, that's common sense. We wouldn't do that. I mean, essentially what's going on when we say this? I mean, you're going to help me out. Elephants, true or false? Elephants are animals. Humans are animals. You're an elephant. Well, never mind. I just scratched a little note to self. Scratch that example. No, that's what we're talking about essentially here. We're talking about, hey, sprinters sprint, field sport athletes sprint. They're the same thing, and they're not. They're not even close. Again, 30% protein rule. For you visual learners, sprinters, different animal. Different animal. Field sport athletes, they're both trying to get from A to B as quickly as possible. They may do it a little differently, but they're attempting to get from A to B as quickly as possible. And you go, God, we're not going to get into this. I don't know why we keep beating this to death, but track and field, the attainment of top speed it's about 60 meters, give or take. The more successful sprinters hit top end later, and they maintain it longer. That's been shown. But sprinters, again, are not field sport athletes. And I keep saying it. Has anybody taken a chance to look at this yet? That was in your little packet that we were giving out? Okay. This is an interesting article about the 40 in here. There's a lot of interesting points. You shouldn't worry about training top speed because you don't hit top speed until about 65 yards. Paper after paper, coach after coach are using a different animal to define their training methodology when it comes to field sports. When I asked the question about dynamics of field sports, how many people thought maximum speed? I'm going to train max speed. Anybody think that? No. Why? Anybody have a rationale as to why? They hardly get there. Why? Exactly. They don't run for 65 yards. Well, speaking of long, rocky, winding journey and a little bit of a what-if thing, let's look at it this way. Has the group of subjects that are being used in this information kind of skewed our outlook on field sports? You know, the thoroughbreds kind of skewed the outlook when it comes to training rabbits. Well, 30% rule. Let's do this. What's known? 100-meter sprinters utilize their chemical energy and convert it to mechanical energy as soon as it comes available. Basically, they're saying 100-meter guys, women, they don't hold back and wait till they get to 60 meters or 80 meters and then turn it on. I mean, as soon as the gun goes off, they're going. They're going. So can maybe athletes attain speed differently by virtue of the methodology they're being exposed to? I mean, maybe the athletes, and we just showed this with apples and oranges, you know, athletes that have the ability to reach top-end speed sooner filter themselves out. That's probably why we're seeing them not be very successful in 100. If they're not going to be successful. Same thing, we don't see 100-meter sprinters playing soccer outside of the skill. We're not even talking about skill. So maybe the group of subjects that are continually defining certain dynamics of field sports have nothing to do with field sports. I mean, another way to look at it is these sprinters are all part of the same predisposed group. I mean, looking at body type, muscle fiber type, bioenergetics, whatever you want to call it, you know, whatever you want to look at. If you take a certain group and have specific training applied to that group, you could develop and improve capacity, become a sprinter or a field sport athlete specific to speed. But maybe these field sport athletes lack the natural advantages to nurture and have this adaptation. Does this make sense at all? Am I just rambling on here? Probably. We see it all the time, neuroplasticity, doing like Sudokus and puzzles and things like that, trying to keep your brain working, trying to make adjustments. Basically what's happening is you're improving your decision-making processes. Maybe these alterations, when you have these field sport athletes exposed to specific training methodologies, elicit some kind of response that has to do with better acceleration, if you want to call it. Having the ability to attain top-end speed sooner. Obviously, we know that linear speed has nothing to do with side to side. So maybe they're adapting to their environment better than some of the subjects that are being used. Because when you look at it, if you read a paper, and this is, again, thrown out all the time. I just saw a baseball paper not too long ago, written by a pretty high-level guy, Major League Baseball guy, that talked about, we don't train maximum speed. Why? Because we don't hit it until 60 meters. So there's really no reason to work on maximum speed. And then in the same paper says 85% of the sprints to first base got to 95%, 98% of their max speed. Well, you just said there's no reason to train it, but then you're telling me your subjects over the course of a year, the majority running to first base, hit top speed, are really close. So you're leaving that out. And don't confuse this with maximum speed training or linear speed development should take precedent over multi-directional movements. I'm not saying that. There's a total difference between saying that and saying you should not leave max speed training out. Physiological adaptation in response to training demands. Is it occurring? Are we seeing this in field sport athletes? You're seeing a lot of things, a lot of research, and a lot of papers that are citing all these 60-meter distances and things like that. You're talking about primarily males, primarily elite sprinters. So you're talking about an incredibly small percentage of people on the planet. Incredibly small percentage of people on the planet, and then applying it to a gigantic group of field sport athletes. So again, a picture you can just look. Linford Christie running a 9.83 at 40 years old is probably not going to be the same type of dynamic or same type of guy training as it would a 14-year-old soccer player or an incoming freshman lacrosse player. It's totally different. But yet we fall under that. Again, paper after paper, article after article, we see the same thing. So when we talk about eliciting different responses, does it happen? Well, it's happening right now, and we're going to touch on the, again, sprinting real quick. Ben Johnson, who was ingesting, his body weight and HGH and steroids every day in '88, 9.79. Usain Bolt 9.69. Usain Bolt 9.58. We're getting so much faster as we evolve. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. Well, what's interesting is if you take the fastest 10-meter segment of these respective 100-meter times, 21 years, it's pretty negligible. Pretty negligible. So are we getting faster top end speed? Maybe a little bit. But you know what the answer is? Pure acceleration, the first 10 meters out of the blocks. That's where we're seeing a difference in time. And I always heard, when I hear pure acceleration, I always try to figure out what, like, impure, unpure acceleration. I'm like, okay, I don't know if it's religious, but either way. So let's look at the 10-meter times. And again, I know the excuse is that, he was like a giant syringe in a unitard. But, 183, 185, 189. I mean, we're not really seeing it at the top end. We're seeing it on the clock, we're seeing a lot different. Why are we seeing that? Well, you know what? Maybe we're seeing some kind of different, we're eliciting some kind of different response because of a specific training methodology. Top speed, 50, 55. Oh, now we're seeing a shift in when they hit top speed, more successful. And not only that, we see a decrement in speed loss around 65, 75, 80 meters. Now they're maintaining it later in a race. So we're not necessarily getting faster per se. The acceleration's not really, as you see, it's not really changing too much. Top speed, though. So what's going on? This is as of December 2. Who's from 2012? Is it 2013? 12? 11? Sorry. Who's from North Carolina State in here by any chance? Okay, good. I hate that. No, I'm just kidding. There's a guy out of North Carolina State. For anybody that's interested, you may want to write this down, highlight it, star it, circle it, and then put it, shade it in, write it in big letters. Dr. Mike Young gets it. If you want to talk about a guy to read up on some of his material that's out there, Mike Young out of North Carolina State, he gets it. He gets it. And what they're showing right now is basically we're staying in pushing mechanics permits a neuromuscular and metabolic shift that allows less fatigue in the race. So training demand and a certain methodology is eliciting a different response within not only the same person, the same population, the same sport. So now let's take it in the opposite direction and get back to field sports. Is it different now? Are we seeing something different in field sports? If we have years of having specific dynamics of a field sport, are we seeing the athletes adapt to the field sport? Well, we want to make sure that as we train again, we have to cut the fat. The restrictions for the NCAA, is anybody from the NCAA front office here? Okay, good. That stuff is just crazy. I really feel for y'all because the limitations that are put on you, but then the expectations they stay the same. The limitations, especially when it comes to athlete ratios and time, is amazing. So with that in mind, we have to have, again, improved performance in a small period of time with a lot of people. So we want to look at a couple of different things and try to eliminate it potentially. And this is usually where I get yelled at, so I'm used to it. Anybody see this movie? Come on. Anybody see this? Anybody read the books? I wasn't a fan of the third one. Anyway, Cadmus has got some pretty serious mechanics going on. Good posture, good arm drive, knee position, and her toe is up. Pretty good. Considering she's in boots and long pants running through the wilderness, she's doing pretty well. Anybody familiar with the triple flexion mechanism? Yes, no? Okay. Maybe I'd say it this way. As soon as you toe off, dorsiflex, pull your ankle up. Help faster recovery, better front side mechanics. Anybody ever hear that? Toe up? Okay, good. That's fine. Well, my partner and I, not partner like, I mean, not that there's anything wrong, but I'm just saying like research, whatever works, I don't care. Okay, that's beside the point. Let's get back to it. We took 6 years, that shows you how little I have to do, 6 years to publish a paper. It took 6 years. It was a 14-page paper and took 113 pages of rebuttals. And partially it's because I'm kind of a jerk and I just get pissed off and don't like to just say, okay, I quit. But part of it was because of this, the triple flexion mechanism. There's so much anecdote out there in regard to this, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't be dorsiflexing. That's not my point. But if you remember back the Linford Christie picture, his dorsiflexion kind of stunk, compared to Cadmus's especially. But the fact of the matter, this mechanism, it's consisting of flexion at the hip, knee, and ankle. And it's actually in response to a painful stimulus. We did an exhaustive search on this. And I say exhaustive. Talking to face-to-face, email, phone call, looking up, reading papers. Anoka, Zatsiorsky, Dr. Richard Stein, who is the leading neurologist in regard to this in the world. And he's piggybacking his work with Dr. Sherrington from 1898 that actually won the Nobel Prize for finding this. The key was painful stimulation to the sole of the foot. What we were finding is significant latency combined with the habituation of the reflex if it's repeated more than once every 10 seconds. So basically, if you are running on glass and taking a step once every 10 seconds, this is something you need to train, what we're finding out. It's a painful stimulus. This is actually the reflex, the mechanism, the trainable mechanism comes from comatose patients when they stick a needle in the sole of their foot, have a reaction. Train it if you want. If you disagree, that's fine. That's fine. But when you have a specific amount of time to get something done, and you're going to use something and work on something that, A, there's no scientific evidence supporting it. No scientific support whatsoever. And B, even if there was, we'll use a real extreme example. Again, using track, it's just easier. Usain Bolt, 300 degrees per second, top speed 44 to 45 kilometers per hour. Hey, Usain, right as your foot's getting off the ground, dorsiflex real quick. Think about it, dorsiflex. I mean, think about how realistic that is. The guy's running 40-something kilometers an hour, how fast that is, and how you have to consciously, it's very difficult to train. There's other things that can be more advantageous from a training standpoint. And this is old school a little bit, the same thing. Toe off. As I toe off, push to create significant horizontal propulsion. Push with my ankle. Well, this is just one of many EMGs you can pull up and see. Multiple groups of researchers, individuals, have shown that the gastroc, as you get to toe off, activity begins to subside and almost doesn't exist. So you go, okay, well, activity, you can look at it from a power standpoint as well. This is a pretty crazy graph. The downward curve is eccentric, concentric. But as we get to, you see foot contact and toe off. As we get to toe off, this horizontal power is pretty much null and void. The two spikes here is vertical impulse, and that gets into back to Dr. Mike Young. We're finding vertical impulse is very, very, very important, incredibly important. And we'll talk about functional joint stiffness, and I hate the word functional because functional is basically defined in the dictionary as having a useful purpose. So again, celery, breathing, things like that, that has a useful purpose if you want to find it. So I'm not big into function. But joint stiffness, vertical impulse, but horizontal propulsion, you're wasting your time. You're wasting your time. Not to mention, hey, right as you toe off, push, and then as soon as you finish pushing, pull yourself up. At the speed of the activity, it's very difficult for somebody to consciously do both. I mean, you have to really think about being usable. And Dr. Jason Vescovi, Raise your hand, please. He's not raising his hand. I promise you he's here. He's given a talk, and I'm not going to steal his thunder by any means on GPS stuff, which we had this roundtable thing yesterday about technology. This stuff will kind of blow your mind. It's unbelievable. It's very interesting. He will show confirmation that there is a game speed now. We're finding that there is such thing as a game speed. We're seeing higher speeds hit at shorter distances than 35 meters. And the magic 35 meters I'm going to get to just in a second here. But we are seeing, in competition, higher speeds hit sooner than in testing. And that's going to be important to remember. Just a little bit of stuff from some work that I've been a part of over the last I don't know how many years now. Looking at United States, England, Canada, both males and females, soccer, rugby, lacrosse, softball, field hockey, baseball, and I'm not going to again steal Dr. Vescovi's thunder with some football stuff, NFL specifically. Levels, looking at middle school, high school, international, all the way up, 11 to 29 years old. So roughly just the thumbnail from some of the things we did, a thumbnail about almost 1,700 athletes. Some of this stuff we've published already. You can look it up. Some stuff is coming out. Some stuff is unpublished at this point. We're looking at a group like this in 35 meters. Specifically, we'll look at female soccer, lacrosse, and field hockey athletes. About 300 middle school, 230, 40 high school, 225 college. Real quick before we get into the yellow part, take a look, first 9.1 meters. This is a 40-yard dash, just 40 straight out, a standing stationary start. Look at the high school, 194, college 197. We're seeing slower times in college than we do in high school. And side note, keep that in the back of your mind when we get here in a minute, because show you how evaluation can totally skew the way you train if you don't look at the right stuff. But anyway, the highlighted portion, you look at the times. We have timing gates, fully automatic stuff, infrared stuff. Look at the timing gates. The last two 10s, last two 10-yard segments, 137, 141, 131, 132, and then 2929. We're seeing top-end speed hit. That's basically showing us top-end speed is hit. And I had a question a while back that, well, maybe they were slowing down right before they got to the last gate, and that's why. And maybe so, but I find it hard to believe that, not only 700, but we're seeing a pretty strong trend through over 2,000 athletes doing that. I don't really want to buy into that, especially when we've got somebody standing towards the last gate encouraging people to run through and all that good stuff. So we're seeing around 30 to 35 yards field sport athletes, and this goes across the board. Male rugby players, and again, with Jay's stuff, the football guys. We're seeing people hitting top speed way before 60 meters. Specific training demands eliciting a specific response. So if we're seeing top-end speed and maximum speed hit in linear progressions, we probably should train it. And again, it shouldn't take precedent. Don't think Lee Taft, if he's in here, who's talking about change of direction stuff, he'll probably shoot me for it. I'm not saying that should take precedent over agility. I'm not saying that. But it needs to be an included component. Fundamental and basic skills of sprinting should not be ignored. Common sense, we need to have productive direction, meaning we need to have good mechanics. Adapt to other sports as part of a proper motor development. Again, max velocity. I had a guy that was an Olympic sprint coach for a while, and then he's moved on. Anybody from LSU here? Man, 0 for 2. He does a lot of stuff at LSU, and he used to say common sense. Hey, you know what? To run fast, you need to run fast. And he used to also one of his things is if I have somebody that can change directions really efficiently and they're slow, I've got somebody that's slow in agility, but I've got somebody that can haul ass and can't change directions real well, I can teach them to change directions. So we want to make sure that we do hit maximum velocity. It's important. It is very important because we're seeing it over and over and over again. Dangers of evaluation. I took this straight off of a paper that had to do with the NFL Combine not too long ago. It was published pretty recently. And again, we're going to bring back that high school, college athlete, female athlete. Two people were used. Athlete number 1, these were the times, the 10 to 20, 20 flying 20 and the total time. Athlete 2, we can see the times. Again, my partner, research partner, we put out a paper about 15 years ago in regard to splits over 40 and looking at it and how it can dictate. People may get there from A to B at the same time, but how they got there was different. And that how you can take those scores and look at them and break them down 50,000 ways, and it'll probably give you some insight as to what needs to be trained. Looking at this, has anybody drawn the conclusion that the first 10 yards is where the the limitation lies for athlete number 2, therefore we should work with the athlete number 2 on the first 10? Has anybody thought about that, looking at it? Because you lose that tenth of a second in the 10, and it stays with you all the way through. Does anybody look at that? Does that make sense? Yeah? I mean, this person, that's what the conclusion came to. Player 2 had a deficit in the first 10 yards, so we better work on that 10 yards. But what's interesting, and again, you've got to have all the pieces of the puzzle and compare apples to apples, is player 1 was a running back, and player 2 was an inside linebacker, and there's 60 pounds difference between the two people. Big car, little car, right? Heavier, it's harder to get moving. High school, females, body mass is a lot smaller than college, so that's why we're seeing that 10. So right now I'm looking at this and go, okay, well, the first 10 I'd use that, okay. But wait, there's 60 pounds difference, and they're two different positions. How do they compare within their own group? Well, the guy, number 1 guy, he was actually below average in size. So he's a little guy. And he actually came out below average in the 40. And the number 2 is above average size and above average in the 40. So I look at this and go, you know what, maybe I should work with the first guy. Because not only is he little, he's not real fast. And he's probably going to get hurt. I mean, you know, with the whole collision thing. So you have to understand, just like trying to compare a sprinter to a lacrosse player or a field hockey player, or having that mentality that 65 meters is when I hit max speed, when we have multiple research, multiple pages and subjects and studies that are showing that that's not the case. When you look at testing scores, make sure you compare apples to apples. You know, it would be even more absurd to say, let's look at a defensive back and an offensive tackle. Oh, geez, well, you know, we need to work with this guy based on the comparison of those two. Make sure that you're looking at comparable statistics. And just because I thought it would be kind of interesting, if they have a tall sweep to the opposite side of the linebacker with this running back, he hits, after about 5 yards of motion, he hits, in 20, he hits about almost 34. And then the linebacker's really negligible. So big car, little car theory, that collision's not going to be real pretty for the small guy. But again, know what you're looking at. Know what you're looking at. Implementation, thank goodness. Exercises. Have a specific goal in mind based on evidence through evaluation, and attack that with common sense and, again, understanding of what you're attempting to do. I have one of my biggest pet peeves, and you can I rant about it all the time. I'll keep it to a minimum. Capitalistic society has kind of ruined our field, because I can take an exercise that I saw somebody use and then tweak it, make it my own, and slap it together and sell a DVD and go, hey, this is a great exercise. And I tweak it, and when I tweak it, I actually compromise what I'm attempting to do, but I make money off of it. It drives me crazy. And that's kind of the good news. I'm definitely not going to try to sell you a book or a DVD today, I promise. I try to stay away from that stuff. So don't overthink things. Don't recreate the wheel, essentially. And I saw this flipping through the packets. Mr. Gambetta's going to be pretty happy about this, because I actually have the same quote he does, so you should be well prepared for this. Franz Bosch and Klump with a K. Look up their book and read it. Their book has got some good stuff in it. Very good stuff. And it's not only, it's kind of like this is. It's educational, academic, but it's also practical. There's a lot of application to it, and why. A baseline fundamental of why do you do it? What do you look for? It's track-driven, but it gives some really interesting stuff in regard to muscle physiology and biomechanics of movement. Definitely worth checking out. Bosch basically talking about weight and resistance training is he looks at it as coordination training with the appropriate resistance to handle body weight resistance, or resist gravity, optimize ground reaction forces, and overcome external resistance. And that's why I'm getting into the resistance side of speed development more so than, hey, let's go out and do some B-skips on the track, and then that's going to make you faster when you play soccer. We want to make sure that you have the ability, or your athletes have the ability, to go through correct ranges of motion, solid mechanics. And if there's any kind of deficiency, we're going to correct that in the weight room. Acceleration exercises. Side note, if you are looking up pictures for a presentation on the internet, do not have your kids in the room, just off to the side, because it's amazing what comes up when you type in the word exercises or acceleration, and you can kind of connect the dots with that. I type in acceleration exercises, and once I got through some interesting stuff, this is kind of what I saw everywhere. And aside from a couple of positions in football, or when a football player tests in a 40, you're really never going to do this. And that's great that I'm not downplaying it. I guess I am. I'm looking, to me, if I'm going to work on acceleration, I'm going to have actual movement-based activities and not standing there. Because if I want to improve movement, I'm going to incorporate movement. And I see this, I go through different websites and DVDs, look, how many people spend so much time on this? And that's not saying this isn't a facet, but it's an incredibly small. I mean, not to say that the guy there in the white and the red shorts, he's probably not in the most advantageous position standing straight up with his legs straight, you know. He looks like he dropped something and was trying to pick it up. Compared to the other guys, obviously. But to me, somebody says, hey, I need to work on acceleration. Well, I'm going to work on something that's going to help acceleration, not standing still and picking up nickels. So here we go. Acceleration exercise. This is kind of a collection of a bunch of different studies thrown together. Lower back dorsal area contributes to achieving high performance in sprint running over distances 10 to 40 meters through elastic energy, the transference of elastic energy from the ground up and down. And remember that crazy quote I used before? Well, it's not. I won't take responsibility for it. The axial, angular, whatever that was saying. That was basically just saying you need to pump your arms or run fast. And we're finding that pumping your arms, not only overcoming inertia, but it's going to aid in that transference. But if you have a weak link, just like everything else, you have a weak link in the chain, you've got some problems. The guy on the left, and this is just a track picture again, just it's easier. I've got a couple of things like that. It's easier to see. Guy on the left with the full-length tight things there, his lower back position is much more advantageous for acceleration than the guy on the right. And you can see the rounded back. And we see this a lot, especially in younger athletes. I say younger, meaning high school and college age athletes. Poor back positions. And that's going to be a contributing factor in poor acceleration. Ooh, look at that. If you want to do these exercises, that's fine. I don't have a problem with the exercises. It's gonna suit a specific purpose. But if you're going to do it, make sure that you have the correct technical aspects. In other words, people pushing sleds and plates and stuff running around, that's whatever you want to do, that's fine. I'm not going to say don't do it, but make sure you can see the rounded lower back. You're reinforcing error. You're going to reinforce error. Pelvic tilt, flat back, dorsal contribution is very important. We're finding it over and over and over again. But yet a lot of times when we see activities such as these, the mechanical issue becomes rounded lower back, especially when they get tired. Fatigue sets in, and I don't want to sound like the NCAA where everything has to be 1 to 50 work to rest ratio or whatever they're saying. But when fatigue sets in to such a degree that the mechanics fail, you're reinforcing error, and you're going to make people slower. And then on the left, real quick, we're talking, see, the pelvis works on all three planes as you accelerate and sprint. But I'm going to show a couple of different exercises here. Frontal plane. The back elbow is closer to I'll say the right side. The right side is closer. That shoulder is closer to that hip. We have a little bit of this as we start, and it's important to keep that in mind, specifically in the lower back region. Anybody here, anything to do with softball? This kid's got a chance to be unbelievable, and she'll make your program the best program in the world. I use her because she's a 14-year-old freshman, and she's chronologically a lot older than she is developmentally, and the kid can run like a deer. And she has a couple of different, I'll catch myself, a couple of limitations that we're working on. This is our first exercise we talk about when we discuss lower back contribution to acceleration. It's very baseline, very simple, and I use her because if she can do it as a younger / weaker athlete, then your athlete should be able to be accustomed to moving through this progression. Hopefully I don't butcher this. Let me see. Pretty simple stuff, just a simple cable machine. Simple cable machine. Hey, look at that, I knew it. Find this again. Do that again. Pulling down and across, except you squat down, get lower. There you go. We want to avoid rotation at this point. And this is incredibly baseline, but when you have somebody that can't even keep their pelvis and their low back in a good position when they accelerate, you're more than likely going to have to start off with this. Lighter is better to start. All you're doing is pulling down across the body, holding it for a count or two, and moving it back up nice and easy. But again, baseline, very baseline progression. But again, it's got a little bit of movement to it instead of being in a three-point stance and looking at whatever. And then we move to the next progression. Essentially now we're going to start hitting that frontal plane a little bit like I had that showed with the elbow or the shoulder and the hip. We're going to look at that. We're going to get into an acceleration position. She's in a split position. We use dumbbells, med balls. I've seen some guys that I've worked with some pretty strong individuals that use an Olympic bar to do it. I wouldn't recommend that unless you're really strong. You're like an Avenger. And we're going to just go across. We're going to go both angles at the same time because it looks cool. We're going across. And again, hitting that plane of movement, specific. And we're going to get a little bit more, like I said, a little bit more of a specific position to mimic that movement in the lower back as we accelerate. And then we'll get even more specific. Another progression. Same concept. Now we're going to add hip extension, hip flexion to hip extension as we move on. And part of the good thing about this is she does some of this a little bit, I'd say, incorrectly. So it's kind of easy now. We can kind of point out some flaws. So your athletes, a lot of athletes, especially as they progress, will hopefully rid themselves of this. Now we're going to, as we move that, we're going to step up a little bit. To increase the demand, I don't like her front shin is not in a very good position. It's in a neutral position. You want to be in a positive direction to mimic that acceleration position a little better. To increase this, we really don't increase the weight per se. We increase her ability to get off the ground. Instead of stabilizing there, we want to be more stable and more dynamic. The stiffness just boom, boom, boom kind of look. But again, she needs to shift her hips a little forward more so we have a better angle in her front shin. And again, she's young, and some of these exercises she's not really accustomed to, but it's good to show some things that aren't perfectly done, in my opinion, so you know what to look for when it isn't done correctly. And again, to get more technical aspect of it. Static strength, we call static strength, and then we move into dynamic here in a second. Static from a standstill position. This is testing oriented also. We can look at it from football oriented. Static or still positions to start with. Getting it. Are you kidding me? Wait till you see that monkey. Hold on a second here. Acceleration position. Do not bend the back leg as you move. No, don't bend the back leg. Static position, you want to have pretty strong maximum hip flexion. And on her go, she explodes off, and then we can turn it into a little bit more dynamic as we move. We'll lower the step and have them actually bound off the step, single leg hip, go, kind of apply metric into an acceleration position. I'm probably going to get sued, but she's not strong enough to do this, but I'm showing it anyway. And you can tell when they're not strong enough because they use too much back leg contribution. They bend the knee. Ready? Go. There you go. She bends the knee. When she sees bend the knee and they start to sit back, they're not strong enough to actually do the exercise. And that's part of the reason I showed this, because you will have athletes, if they do that, you've got to back down the size of the step or back down the progression. But again, we can add a plyometric step with a little bit lower, so as soon as they leave the block, hit the ground, plyo into it, single leg bounds. Interesting note, this is actually a picture taken of me when I heard this about the hamstrings. I was on the phone. There's very few things I remember in my life. It's like, anybody see Memento? Anybody see that movie, Memento? I got tattoos everywhere because I got to remember all my stuff. I remember this because I was on the phone and they were like, the hamstring extends the knee when you sprint full speed. And that's like, what? I was making spaghetti and I'm on the phone and like in the kitchen, like trying to figure this out. And it's indirect, but it occurs. And the reason I even bring this up is because it plays into a little bit of the next slide. And this is a great magazine. He's not really that bad. But the foot plant, if you want to look at it, and I'll bring this up about successful mechanics and productive direction, he's got his foot kicked out a little bit. It may be the angle of the camera, I don't know. But there's a lot of athletes out there. University of Florida? Okay, good. There's a guy that plays there, played football. He's a track guy who's had hamstring issues, and he can run. He's a 9'9" guy. He can run. He's had some hamstring issues. And Dr. Vescovi got a lot of phone calls every time I watched him run. Like, oh my gosh, if we could just fix that guy, we could 980 him in a hurry, and we could keep him healthy because he has an issue that has to do with this that we need to fix, and we'll see it. You'll see it quite a bit. And it has to do, again, with less successful mechanics. The importance is not much the amount of total force produced, but the way it's oriented onto the ground. And again, not to overshadow and say force isn't important, but if it's not in a productive direction, we've got some real issues. You can look and see what all these people have in common. The first and foremost thing that jumps out at you is they don't have a head, which is going to obviously create problems because you're running out of the lane and all that. But aside from that, if you look at their foot plant, and how it's oriented into the ground, you can see them kicking out to the side. And this is beyond acceleration, because if you notice from a dead standstill, or even a little bit of movement initiated acceleration, you'll have your feet kicked out, and that has to do with the rotation of the pelvis and that jazz. But when we're talking about max speed here, you've got people kicking their feet out, we've got an issue. We have an issue. And not only is it going to affect performance directly, but it's also going to elevate your chance for injury. Something's going on that's not right, and we need to fix it. And we're going to show you something. And these guys, again, I could have gotten field sport, but it's a lot easier in track. There's a billion of them, especially with the guy in the green-yellow thing. He's got a pointed calf. I don't know how that works out. But we need to make sure that we can straighten foot plant, be more efficient, productive. All that force that we're trying to produce, we want to make sure it's in a productive direction. These guys these are top-tier guys, and look at the foot plant. And it's a technical aspect that is often ignored. Foot plant, we've got Chambers and Bolt. Totally different. Hamstring, this is part of the monkey slide. This is actually a diagram anybody, you want to write this down when it comes to the hamstring stuff, it's interesting. Again, there's no magic bullet out there that says this exercise is going to make everybody the fastest people in the world. But again, little pieces of the puzzle helps injury prevention or whatever you want to label it, but also performance. The monkey slide, Tiddow, T-I-D-O-W, Tiddow and Wyman in Germany actually built a plexiglass-type track and had video analysis, EMGs, I mean, everything you can hook up to possibly hook up, and videoed from underneath the sprinters. It was interesting stuff, and that's kind of the basis of where it comes in with this hamstring adductor contribution to speed. So basically, we're looking at a hip. So the runner, we see pelvis, foot plant. The foot is going down, and the runner is running basically up the slide. We're looking at the hamstring forming the inner reins, just like kind of a horse, the inner reins, and then we've got the glutes and the adductors for the outer reins. Now, when we talk about foot plant kicking out, mechanical advantage, glutes, as you approach the ground, when they contract, they are pulling your leg out. They are pulling the foot out. They're rotating the femur externally. If you're weak internally, we can't straighten that back up. When we land, we've got poor foot plant. We've got very unproductive direction. So we want to work on some things that have to do with adduction. But, well, I won't say it because I'll get in trouble. Those machines that used to sit on and do this adduction, I mean, that we talk about specificity. That's not very specific. I mean, unless you're going to sprint sitting down doing this, I don't think it's very, I mean, maybe you do. But for me, you don't, So we're going to go with we're going to try to work on the adductor magnus, the adductors, but make it plane specific. She struggles with this a little bit, and we're talking 6 pounds. 6 pounds. She couldn't do this at all, and this is one of her issues. And this exercise is no joke. Try it. It's a simple cable machine, got a little Velcro attachment. We're going to work on teaching the body basically to fight against that glute as you externally rotate, try to bring it back into play before you hit the ground so you're in a little bit more productive direction. She couldn't do it, so we used rubber bands, the tubing, and we'd measure out from the wall X amount of distance so we could keep track of her productivity. Once she's strong enough, an athlete's strong enough, we'll increase the weight slightly, but we start increasing the speed of movement and we start increasing the range of motion of the movement. But just to show you what we're talking about here. Through the front side, trying to keep it in line, and she's struggling somewhat. It's actually not as bad as you think. But initially, could not even come close to doing that with 6 pounds, and again, she's numerically, traditionally, a pretty darn strong kid. But again, now we're starting to train the body in a very specific manner to elicit a specific response to correct a limitation. This is something, if you have athletes that sprint, once they get 10, 12 yards into it, and you start seeing foot plant kicked out, this will calm that down, and it'll make them faster because that productivity is going to be more positive, more efficient. Stiffness. We want to create super balls instead of cotton balls. Lower body stiffness. We basically, again, functional joint stiffness. Increases the vertical impulse, which we find very important. Shortened ground contact time, which refers back to the old easiest equation stuff with the 30% protein guy. Increase elastic return, absorb shock, and controlled collapse during support. You're going to create a runner, a sprinter, a field sport athlete is going to have a sinusoidal path. They're going to have this kind of path as they sprint with their pelvis. You have vertical impulse as you move forward, then down. But once you get to baseline and foot contact, when you see athletes that run with soft knees and sit, you've got a problem with stiffness. You have a problem with stiffness, and you need to work on that. We want to basically look like, if you watch people that can really run, they look like they kind of bounce. They hit the ground and just go. As opposed to the other people that they sit sometimes, they spend longer time on the ground. You need to have more energy, bioenergetics, to get that vertical impulse to move forward. So again, we want to create Super Bowls. A lot of people probably already do this. A lot of people already do things like this. Jumping rope forward, bunny hops, depth jumps, depth drops, things that are important for stiffness. I highlighted forward jumping rope forward. I'm not a fan of jump roping. The only reason why is because it's skill-oriented, and a lot of times you compromise the activity with the skill. And just because you can jump rope well doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be able to run, because I worked with I've worked with several world champion kind of boxer guys that could jump rope like you couldn't believe, but they couldn't run out of sight in a week. So I try to eliminate the skill standpoint and concentrate on the actual drill. Bunny hops, basically feet together, balls of your feet, heel off the ground, lock the ankle, knees. I don't want to say lock, knees stiff, and it's literally like you're jumping rope, but we're moving forward. As much force, we're going to hit the ground with force, but we want to eliminate the ground time as quickly as possible. The concentration is get off the ground quickly. 20, 30, 40 touches, walk back, recovery, hit the ground and go, hit the ground and go. Depth jumps and depth drops. In regard to depth jumps, anybody here ever use, what are they called, jump mats? Jump mats? Jump mats, like $200-$300 or something. Jump mat, they'll give you amortization time. They'll give you ground contact time. If you're using it and have the ability and the budget and the time and all that good stuff that the NCAA takes away from you, it's a good idea to put a jump mat below a box and watch the ground contact time of the athlete, because if you're trying to increase stiffness or return, trying to lower amortization, you probably need to know how much time they're spending on the ground, whether you should lower the box or when fatigue sets in. So anything a tenth, 1500ths of a second, go as high as, about 1500ths of a second. Anything above that, you need to either lower the box or more rest. Again, we want to be specific. Hit the ground and go. If you have an athlete that's doing a depth jump off of a box and they're on the ground for 2/10, 2800ths of a second, depending on when you're working on, if it has to do with amortization, ground contact time, you're really training the athlete to become slower. So to understand what time is spent on the ground is important. And lastly, to get to it, again, if we haven't figured this out by now, sprinters are not field sport athletes, I promise. Fundamentals should be applied, but they also need to be tweaked. That's where the art comes in, to the uniqueness of the sport and specifically the athlete. And don't ignore max speed training and GPS stuff, which again, later in the day you'll hear about that if you attend, hopefully, how much that is actually being put into play now, literally, pardon the pun, within competition. Analyze but don't outsmart yourself. I mean, compare apples to apples. Offensive tackles to 100-meter sprinters probably is not a good idea. Keep your subjects, keep things in common so you can actually get some information that's usable. And again, try to implement some integrated motion-based training. Movement, run fast. Understand what ground contact time, stiffness, low back contributions, things of that nature. And lastly, for the people that are looking, my son he wants to go to your school, and I made a joke of this. My 6th grade son, who's actually 5'10", and he wants to go to your school, so if you want to recruit him. He's actually not an athlete at all, funny as it is. I know, every day I wake up and go, ugh. But anyway, hey, any questions, comments beyond today, please email. I am all about talking shop, even if I'm wrong. I want to hear about it. I want to make sure that we understand what's going on, because, again, it's a field of shared knowledge, and the only way we're going to move forward is discussion. And don't be afraid to be wrong. It's important. Debate is good. Debate is good. Okay, I guess any questions, comments? Good. That means I was either really good or I was horrible. Yeah.
On your step up, purposely pushing through the front foot, heels, not front heel, that wasn't on the box.
Yeah.
Trying to eliminate any back.
Yeah, she needs to be shifted forward, but yeah, we're looking midsole, then midfoot, forefoot, yeah. Yeah, oh yeah, definitely positive shin angle, and that's why I tried to bring it up a little bit. And it's, again, she's young, and we're trying to work on that, but to get that positive shin angle, so when we have triple extension, it's in the productive direction. Again, not the triple flexion, the triple extension, and that contribution. Very good. Okay, good. Well, again, thank you very much. Hopefully, I helped out a little bit. So, thank you.